Hello, my nubile art sluts. It's Allison Moon, and you're listening to Artgasm, the podcast all about art and sexuality and all the ways they get into trouble together. Today on Artgasm, I'm so delighted to bring to you an interview with one of my all-time favorite humans on the planet. I am not at all overselling that. Dr. Carol Queen is an amazing human being. She is a sex educator. She's a sexologist. She is an archivist. She is a writer and a sex worker and does just every kind of thing around sexuality that you could possibly imagine. And with class and grace and style, she's really, and I'm not overselling this, she's who I want to be when I grow up. And I'm so delighted to be able to bring you this interview with her. It's a little bit bittersweet because I had intended on doing this interview with her last year when I was supposed to go to San Francisco. That trip got canceled. And so I interviewed her just a couple of weeks ago when I was in San Francisco on business. And unfortunately, it was timed kind of horribly perfectly with the closure of the Center for Sex and Culture, which is the brick and mortar archives and community center that she and her partner, Robert Lawrence, created and built together about 20 years ago. And I wanted to talk to her about archiving and about the history of sex-positive culture, specifically in San Francisco, but it feeds into so many different places. And it was sad to be there. I'm very privileged that I got to be there the weekend that it closed. We went to the closing night party, and I saw just a huge amount of, sex-positive culture heroes in San Francisco, people that are friends of mine, people that I very much admire, who I haven't seen since I left the city almost 2 years ago. And it was a really beautiful time to be able to be there to celebrate. And at the same time, it was, as I said, very bittersweet. But I'm glad that Carol spared a couple of moments for me in the midst of packing up all of her archives and sending them to far-flung universities and spaces that she will discuss in detail in this interview, because she is just such a wealth of understanding and information about the kinds of stuff, like physical stuff, that people use to share their sexuality, to explore their sexuality. When we think about the ways in which we mark time and create archives, well, these days, so much of our sexual explorations are digital. We don't have these physical manifestations of sexuality anymore. We have Instagram invites, and we have Facebook posts, and we have porn searches, and we have, our own porn cache. But in terms of having physical objects that can be held onto by people looking to explore this current moment in time, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to find those moments as the digital amass just starts burying things. And so what I loved about what Carol kept is that in her archives, it wasn't just what you'd expect, like porn, VHS stuff, or videos or print magazines. It was flyers. It was invitations to sex parties. It was zines. It was handmade stuff designed to bring people together in physical space. It was an advertisement to tell somebody that you saw cruising in the Castro, hey, I want to see you on Saturday night at this bathhouse or at this sex party. And that to me is so interesting. There's so much richness of culture in those moments, because maybe at the time they didn't think too much of it. But to be able to look at these things as these moments in time, to be able to record the history of sexuality, I think it's so valuable. And I'm so grateful to Carol and Robert and the Center for Sex and Culture for holding on to these things. And I'm so grateful to the various institutions that are going to be holding on to them in the future. So I'm so delighted that you can be here today listening to my interview with Dr. Carol Queen. But before we get to that, a couple of announcements, a couple of, little things that I think are interesting that are happening on the interwebs. Firstly, I am going to be teaching again at the Close in Munch in Portland, Oregon on Monday, March 18th. And my partner and I are going to be co-teaching one of our favorite workshops to teach together, navigating open relationships or navigating non-monogamy. So if you are somebody who's been curious about non-monogamy, if you're somebody who's already in a non-monogamous situation and you're trying to figure out how to do it maybe a little cleaner, a little bit better, a little bit easier, come to this Close and Munch. It's going to be real fun. My partner and I love teaching together. He's been off on hiatus for the past year as he was in this accountability process, and the formal accountability process is now over. And so he is now teaching again. And I'm so grateful and so delighted to be able to teach with him, one of his first teaching gigs back on the scene here at the Close and Munch. It's going to be a lot of fun. So that's Monday, March 18th. I think it's $10 at the door. And it's a great opportunity for you, if you're in the Portland area, to meet other kinky people, other swinging type people, other open relationship people. So yeah, that'll be fun. I also wanted to thank everybody who came out to see me at the Mystery Box on Valentine's Day night. I had a wonderful time. I loved sharing the story. So thank you to everybody who came up to me afterwards, bought books, and told me that they listened to the podcast. So thanks to all of you. That made me just feel so good. I had a great time. And the story that I told, the video is actually up online right now for my Patreon subscribers only. So if you are a Patreon subscriber, you totally get to see that video in full. It will go up online to the rest of the general public in just another couple of days. But it's a really great opportunity for Patreon subscribers to see this early, and also just to, again, support this podcast. As you know, I don't do advertisements. And so it's just, I get this thing done by the generosity of people who enjoy this podcast and are willing to donate at any level that feels comfortable for them, from $1 all the way up to whatever. Please consider becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/artgasm. And then you can become a member. You can listen to all of my special bonus episodes just for Patreon subscribers, etc., etc. So I'd like to spend the first couple of minutes on every episode talking about something in the news or something that people are talking about in terms of art and sexuality that I find really interesting. And so there are kind of three little bits that I want to share, all of which, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your social media savvy, happened on Twitter recently. So the first piece is by a person named Alexandra Rowland. They tweet at _Alex Rowland, ROWLAN. And they have a thread all about men's fashion and the way in which it got, I don't know if the word destroyed is fair. Alex seems to be fairly adamant about the destruction therein, but the kind of rounding down of what used to be kind of this glamorous gaudiness around the Regency era in England, and it turned into what we consider the men's suits and the acceptable ways that men are allowed to dress up in our culture now. And there's one specific guy who ruined it for everybody, basically. And this would all be a very interesting and satisfying, kind of salacious story if it were true, but it turns out it's not. There are a couple of fashion historians who got in on the act who shared their rebuttals, basically, to Alexandra Rowland's initial screed. And these are two people that I want to highlight. If this is interesting to you, I strongly suggest you read through the whole threads, because they add a lot more nuance and complexity to this very simple story. And that complexity has to do with war and just the changing of nations and the various movements therein. And so these are two people who are both fashion historians, and they add a lot more important detail to the story. And the first person who tweets really, really wonderfully about this is named Elise, and they tweet at Champ Elise, so it's CHAMPS_ELYSE. And Elise suggests that really understanding how fashion movements have changed, you cannot separate that from economic trends, which feels very obvious on the outside, but I think there is this tendency to think of all art forms as somehow outside of the economy and outside of consumerist trends and outside of various revolutions in the ways that we manufacture and distribute things. But that's certainly not the case. And so Elise does a great job of kind of breaking down how the Napoleonic Wars really influenced the ways that men's fashion happened. And this cuts through a couple different classes, but it does speak to especially the higher classes, especially the classes that were deciding who goes to war as opposed to the ones who were actually fighting it. And often what we think of as unfortunately, unfairly frivolous art form like fashion, because it has become such a punchline in so much of our culture, understanding that actually fashion is inextricably linked from these large global movements around warfare and around accessibility of materials and those, again, distribution of their materials.
For instance, a really great little point that she makes in her argument is that we talk about, when we think about wig powdering as being this very, kind of indicative, kind of decadent thing. And so, but how during the wars, France was dealing with famine and bread shortage, and so flour could not be spared to use as hair powder. And these very significant cultural forms dictating what we consider to be fashion. We can think about that more in terms of like modern movements when we talk about synthetics or accessibility to things like cotton and the labor required for those kinds of things. That fashion tends to be the end user result of grand economic movements. And another person who adds really great context and really great history and research to this argument or this conversation is a person named Cassidy Percoco. And Cassidy tweets at Mimic of Modes, so MIMIC of Modes. And Cassidy is a fashion and material cultural scholar. And Cassidy adds amazing detail and research to this argument as well, discussing, again, where these materials come from, how they were popularized. And why I think this is so relevant to artgasm in general is that I think it's important for us to realize that while a story of an individual changing the course of history is very satisfying, particularly in our very Western individualistic lens, these iconoclasts that have decided something and changed the world, it's actually far more common, and I think actually a little bit more beautiful, to look at these movements not as the agenda of any one individual deciding to make something so, no conspiracy or secret cabal of people who are deciding the course of history, but really these large cultural forces that are integrated in different ways throughout our lives. And again, we can think of something like art or something like fashion as frivolous and extra and not subject to these grand global movements. But that's not true, because we are all living in this world together and we are all inextricably linked from these great forces. And so in some ways it kind of talks about this whole notion of like the personal is the political, or everything is political, which is both completely not true and also very true in terms of our understanding of how inextricably linked these large cultural forces are on everything, including the fabric that our clothing is made out of. And what's amazing about that is that it does have these very intense pop cultural relevances, right? So the reason I think why this thread started in the first place was Billy Porter wearing a fabulous tuxedo ball gown on the red carpet at the Oscars the other night. And in doing so, he brought to light a lot of different cultural forces, not just the kind of homogeneity or the race to the middle of men's fashion, but rather understanding the intersections of class and race and sexuality and how all of those things also have their own subtle sometimes or overt sometimes cultural forces, and how all of those forces kind of play at each other and tug each other in different directions. The dress that Billy Porter wore was a direct homage to the ballroom scene, which was a scene that came out of Black queer community. And so being able to display that and to be able to display this non-normativity, it marked that moment in time, but it also marked him, Billy Porter, as pointing to the non-normative state of what it is to be a Black gay man in modern Western society. And what I love about this is that inspired one more layer of this Twitter thread, this kind of multi-layered conversation between multiple people. And one of those people tweets at Gay Black Geek on Twitter. And Gay Black Geek spoke to how Black male fashion in America kind of found itself almost separate from this movement towards the middle, this kind of homogeneity, this navy or gray or black suits only. Whereas Black men kind of dodged that bullet in some interesting way because, as he says in his Twitter thread, Black masculinity in America is to be in a marked state. You cannot disappear into a crowd when you are a Black man in American society. So if you are already living in a marked state, if you are already non-normative in the way that you exist in the world, if your very body itself, regardless of what you put on top of that body, if that body itself is considered other, then you don't necessarily have to play to the middle because you can't. You're not allowed. And in this way, there is a freedom around the way that black male fashion got to evolve. And in that way, there's a little bit more peacockness. There's a little bit more color. There's a little bit more curious cuts. And again, if you look at any sort of red carpet, you'll notice that the kind of often what we would call the best dressed men tend to be black. I mean, if we look at the Black Panther premiere party, for instance, that was just wall-to-wall fantastic men's fashion, exploring different kinds of color, different kinds of cut, different kinds of proportion, different kinds of material. And there is a reason for this. And similarly, to be queer in American culture is to be in a marked state as well. And that marked state allows you freedom because it denies you freedom in all sorts of other ways. And I think that this is a really important thing to start to understand, these different ways in which these cultures and subcultures interact with each other, speak to one another, negate one another, but these forces that are at play, these large, grand forces that aren't inorganic, but they are often due to much larger things that people aren't clocking. And these larger things aren't biology oftentimes, right? We'll see these very conservative arguments that say, well, men be like this, women be like that. And that is often almost always not the case. People who are armchair evolutionary psychologists around the ways that men and women are often completely wrong and also ignore the millennia of human development and all of these intricate dances that these different cultural forces do in order to make us where we are, in order for us to assume that these things are normal. Normal is a result of cultural forces. Normal is not just biology, and we cannot remove ourselves from the forces of time in order to suggest that we all come from the womb in a specific way. And for me, the takeaway is take a moment whenever we are presented with something that we consider to be just obvious in and of itself, and suggest that maybe it's not just in and of itself. Maybe these are just cultural forces at work that have told us this is the thing that we're supposed to find sexy. And this is the thing we're supposed to find neutrally sexy. Everyone can agree on the fact that this is sexy, as opposed to maybe we've all been taught that we're supposed to feel that way. And if you feel differently about that, if you feel differently about how you feel in your own body, what clothes make you feel sexy, what clothes you want to see your partner in, if those things aren't the things that we've been told are supposed to be, that somehow we're the broken ones, as opposed to society just not having enough room or having enough conversation around all the nuances thereof. And why this is so great for this conversation with Carol Queen that I'm about to have is that Carol uses this phrase a couple of times that I think is just so delightful. And it gave me pause at first, but she says that she had too much sexual orientation. And what I love about that is this notion that sexual orientation is not just a direction, but it's rather an abundance. And the idea that if you have an abundance of sexual orientation, people don't really know what to do with that. So I think this is really useful as we segue into my conversation with Dr. Carol Queen. So you will enjoy this conversation. I certainly did. And so please indulge, look at the show notes. And I list a bunch of the things. She drops a lot of names real fast. I tried to collect as many of them as I could. But by all means, Google just wantonly. Be aggressive in your Googling as she drops these names, because these are artists that she's talking about that you want to look up. These are parties, these are cultural movements, these are histories, these are educators that you want to know about. These people have created a legacy that we all get to partake in. I share a small story in my interview with Carol about learning about my own sexual history and the legacy by talking to an elder. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Carol Queen. Awesome.
All right.
Shall we?
So, yeah.
Thanks for joining me, Carol.
I am so delighted to be with you.
Yeah, it's nice to see you. I was feeling a little sad today because when I reached out to you originally to do the podcast, it was last year at this time when I was going to be in the Bay Area. and I wanted to come see the center. I wanted to go through the archives and talk to you about the stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And instead, I'm here the weekend that you are closing the center.
Mailing the archives away to
Yeah.
Harvard and
Yeah.
some other places. Yeah, but that does mean that we've been digging around in the archives lately. So you can still ask me some questions about
good.
the archives, and I would probably know some things to tell you.
Yeah, so I mean, I would just love if you wouldn't mind, because I actually don't know the history of the Center for Sex and Culture. I mean, this space that, like a brick and mortar space that you founded with your partner, is that right?
Right, with Robert.
So tell me about it.
So, the founding myth of the center is that in 1994, Robert, my partner Robert Morgan Lawrence, and I were in New York City staying with Betty Dodson. And she, in case any of your listeners do not know, is sometimes called the mother of masturbation. She didn't really totally invent it, but she definitely popularized it.
Especially among women, at least.
Yes, and gave those of us who wanted to theorize about it some real support. So, and she's also old enough to be my mom, and from Kansas like my dad, and very plain spoken, and just tells you what needs to be said. A fine quality, and at least some people.
I think it gets easier with age to take that.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah. I'm becoming a little more like that than I was, and I welcome it, to be honest. Betty said, "You kids should start a place." And the backstory to You Kids Should Start a Place was that she had been looking for places to do her body sex workshops in the Bay, and she couldn't find any that were up to snuff for her. And as it turned out, once we made this place so that she could do it, she never came and did a body sex workshop, although she came and did a slideshow of her art and did a talk. So it wasn't that we didn't get any Betty after being informed that this was what we were going to do with our lives on her behalf. So, and the rest of the backstory is, why would it be us kids to do that, which we were in our 30s and 40s at the time also, I might add, kids. Why? Because we were really covering the waterfront in those days, and not just in terms of play culture, which we were. We ran the Queen of Heaven parties. We got around. There were a few months when people said, "Oh, I thought you left town," because basically we had been in the apartment, sort of in a Ouroboros circle, eating each other's tails for a while, but then we went outside and did it out there, and
in the streets.
And I had come to San Francisco to be a sexologist, so I was at the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. I had begun to work at the Lusty Lady a minute or two after getting Robert. I was doing sex work of other kinds as well. I started in at San Francisco Sex Information, where Robert was already on the training staff, and then I got on the training staff, and I began working at Good Vibrations, all in a period of about a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, from 1989 to... I think Robert and I met at a Jack and Jill off party, probably the second one ever,
Wow.
in 1989, and boom, there we were. And so it was, like 5 years in, when we didn't necessarily need another project, but Betty was saying, "You two seem to have run around and met everybody and learned all the communities." And that really was something that especially I was really into doing. I came up in Oregon, where I just had way too much sexual orientation for the community at that time. I was like, I didn't just have a one-word sexual orientation, for starters, and I was bi and then some, and it was just a thing. It was an issue. So when I came to San Francisco, it was really part of what drew me to the Bay to start exploring what was going on out there, what could be done if you and explored, and who could you meet if you weren't in a relatively restrictive, progressive but not super sexually progressive college town. And a lot of us came up in places like that, right? And it gives you a little bit of this fire to get your arms around it. It certainly did that for me. And so the function of the Center for Sex and Culture being a space for all adults who, plus fiscally sponsoring Scarletine to cover that part, who do consensual whatever they do, any gender identity, any sexual orientation identity, or multiple identities, or play style, or relationship configuration, or any of the axes that we could put ourselves on in any of those ways. It has always been my strong interest in trying to get as much of that together in one place as possible. So the "you kids should do it" was about, you probably know somebody from most of the sides of this scene, or many scenes, that you could draw in to make that kind of a place. And so we talked for the next, 6 years, doing Queen of Heaven parties, going to conferences, writing some books, doing some things. And finally, we went out to dinner with a guy that we knew. We'd known him for a long time. And he was like, "You two talk about doing this project all the damn time, but you never do it. Here's several $1,000s. Go get your nonprofit." So we had an angel investor come from out of the community.
Wow.
Sort of techie guy who had a little extra to throw at us, and specifically the plan was, go get your nonprofit status and see what you can do with it.
Wow.
So we hired an attorney and answered all the feds' questions, and then the attorney cut them down to very short sentences and sent the much shorter form in, because I was just telling them everything.
Even with a name like the Center for Sex and Culture.
I know. They were like, maybe they'll give you your nonprofit, but shut up about all the stuff that you're planning to do.
They don't need to know.
Don't even say the word Masturbate-A-Thon. Don't say it once. But I can explain why it's no, don't do that.
The feds don't understand why it's awesome.
So in 2000, in the summer, we got our state of California nonprofit status, and a year later, we got it from the feds. And 5 years after that, the feds, I think, put most new nonprofits on sort of probation, and certainly we were on it. Like, what are you people doing, really? And they must not have paid very close attention, because we did get our nonprofit status ultimately.
Good.
And we started to do pop-up stuff, and got a storage unit and started to collect to the archive even before
Oh, wow.
we had a space. And our space came to us in 2004, courtesy of Carol Lee, also known as Scarlet Harlot, the fabulous sex work activist. And she was like, "Oh, we've got a place where my office is." And they did. They had a nice big room. Looked sort of like a comedy club, one of those brick wall back of the stage situations, and enough room for lots of art to hang on the walls for art shows, and a separate room for the library. And we were off and running and started to do all kinds of stuff all the time, and always were collecting books, making art shows, making sex ed classes, doing cultural events, and doing discussions and meetings, and renting the space out for other people's things. So it always was part of the vision, like you might be thinking, well, aren't those 7 different mission statements? Yes, they are. We just smashed them together and rolled them up, and then put sprinkles on the outside, and went ahead and did what we were doing, and so turned it into a kind of community center almost as soon as we could, because we knew that there was some interest and some need.
So interesting, because, the vision, obviously, of a community center makes a lot of sense, but where did the vision of the archives come from? Was that separate or part of it?
I was thinking recently, who really were my sort of heroes and inspirations around the center? And I think they were the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, which claims to have, several million storage units packed with the sexual. I'm exaggerating, but with a sexual knowledge and culture of our time.
Really?
And I was like, where are they all? They're all over the place. I didn't get in to see all of them, but
did
what
they
they had.
go to the grave with Ted or?
Well, no. His widow is.
Okay.
It's like, where do I put this stuff now?
Yeah, no
So
kidding.
with any luck, that dilemma will be be I remember when Ted put his arm around me at a shindig we held for him when he was a grand marshal.
The director of the institute.
Yeah, the guy who co-founded and was the president of the institute for the longest time puts his arm around me and goes, well, now we're going to merge. We're going to merge our places. I'm going to, we'll get together. You could run the archive. And I was like, no! Do you ever have somebody put their arm around you that you're like, I think I could duck and walk away from this arm? That's what I did. Because it was already overwhelming, and that was much too overwhelming to think about. But one of the other ones was Good Vibrations, of course, which had its own multi-purpose quality. I was there as a SESA, sex educator sales associate, but I was also there doing education, continuing ed for the staff and working up their education programming, which heretofore had been San Francisco sex information, and they wanted to make it, sort of bring it in-house. And helping review books, and I became the person who invited the outside educators in to teach, and I became the person who was the curator of the art wall for a while. So I was doing all those different kinds of things there, and that was part of what was engaging to me, was that it was a place to play with culture as well as sell sex toys, which all by itself would have been a great job, but there were all these different pieces to it. And of course, San Francisco sex information itself had a sort of an inspirational role on some levels. And finally, 848 Community Space, which not everyone remembers, but it was a very big important location in the 90s. Probably the best known person who was a founder and a holder of that space was Keith Hennessy, the performance artist. And but it was wasn't just him, it was a wonderful community of people. All the performance artists in San Francisco sort of orbited around it and went through it and did their shows there. And we did sex parties there. We did readings and art events there, just amazing stuff. And that, of all these inspirations, there's a way in which that was the most inspirational inspiration. It truly did bring in lots of different kinds of gigs, events, projects, and it just wove them together to make a community that was informed by all the other things. So somebody could come in with one interest or one special desire to explore a particular kind of thing they liked there, but they were going to get invited to different things. And I think that's one of the ways that the diverse community in the Bay Area, because there were many communities, of course, and then there's the weaving of those people within the communities that think that's interesting.
Yeah.
That don't just want to stay like with like and be siloed or whatever, but want to, maybe they have more sexual orientation than they know what to do with, like me, or maybe they're just interested in all these different things. But there's a way in which the cultural piece, carrying messages about sex and gender and community, allows people who are just interested in culture to tune in. That was always also the part about the collection, the library and the other stuff, was to hold that material so that in its diversity it could talk to each other and let people who were looking at it know what different kinds of ways of understanding sexuality and living in sexuality community, or a different kind of sexual life there could be, since people tend to come from whatever community most embraces them or they feel safe with, but often we run there from the community of origin that wasn't as welcoming. But what do the straight people do when they don't want to act like straight people, but they're still heterosexual? They make these kinds of communities. And, for the longest time, particularly when I was lesbian identified solely in my 20s, there was, and I was always not very good at that, right? But I was lesbian identified.
I feel like I remember when you told me that story. I'm like, I feel like this
I
feels
wasn't very good at it. I mean, sure, I was, on one hand, I was great at it. And on another hand,
the ladies were very confident.
I do say so myself. But on the other hand, I had too much sexual orientation, and the way that I subsumed the non-lesbian part was just getting me a mess of gay male pornography, which had men in it, but it was still queer, and it was kinky as hell. It was good. It was good strategy for a minute, and then it was like, I better book my ticket to San Francisco now. I'm not finding enough of this actually on the hoof in my college town.
Right.
So, but there was something about the way that exploring the different kinds of community that had grown up, in many cases, inspired by the one before. If you were only in that one community, you wouldn't know about the inspiration of the one before. You would have had to be there sort of at the genesis of the development. A very specific example I can give you is that the zine revolution of the 1990s in the Bay was inspired by On Our Backs magazine. Entertainment for the Adventurous Lesbian, or as I like to call it, the Adventurous Lesbian, Bisexual, and all those guys who are on the email list with just an initial. And there was something about the way that magazine represented that opened doors that they had no interest or probably even, really, we don't give a shit if men like this magazine. This magazine is not for men.
Right.
And yet it wasn't the same as I'm going to pick up like a lesbian porn. It wasn't like that because it reflected back thinking about sex and cheeky perspectives about it and genderedness. And it was a very, very important publication. And a whole bunch of people went, I got to do my version. And their version was so different. And yet, more than a couple of zine makers said, oh, what I was really inspired by was On Our Backs.
That's awesome.
And that's part of it. I don't even know that everybody involved in On Our Backs knows that.
Sure.
But, because I was there for that and then there for that in the zines, and the zines were sort of the way I became a published writer, right? So I was there for that, and I can bring it forward. People will go, oh yeah, my blog was inspired by that. And today,
sure.
there's a version thereof.
Yeah.
It's not the kind that you can keep in an archive in the same way now, because it's not as much dead tree as it used to be, but we're still inspiring each other, obviously.
Oh, yeah. Well, I like that you were just talking about the silo effect, because I feel like that's such a part of mythology around, cities in general, but I think also generations of queerness in general, that when I moved to Los Angeles, it was like there were the lesbian bars, and then there were the gay bars, and never would the two meet. And they would even have different neighborhoods, and there was this kind of talk of how everything was separate, and it was even very much like pathologizing people who were either bisexual or interested in exploring all the flavors. And even among straights, you might have the leather people, and then you'd have the latex people, and then you have the it feels like there was these notions that they were only like with like, and what the center did. And it certainly felt like it was a space where everybody could hang out. Do you feel like that was reflected? Did you feel like the diversity was reflected in the people who came through the space? Do you feel like there were still people who were like, I'd prefer just to hang out with other gay leathermen, I won't come in? Well,
the thing that really, really struck me I mean, obviously, there was an awful lot of sort of mixing and mingling, particularly at the cultural events and the art shows and the, you know, Perverts put out readings and things like that would, again, because the cultural events, because they just invite an audience in. You could be the member of an audience no matter who you are, right? So there was something permission giving about that, intriguing to the people who liked whatever kind of art or culture was on show. And so there was that piece. But the thing that really surprised and chagrined me when I started to hear it, and I think it's one of the really interesting dilemmas of the Center for Sex and Culture and places that try to be as radically pansexual as that. And when I'm using the word pansexual, I'm using it in the more the old school way, and not so much in the you dig people of whatever gender identity that it's more morphed toward. It's the all the people in their sexualities and gender identities.
It's a group identity.
It's a group identity, or at least a something to name such a big and amorphous group, right? So and also just kind of the philosophy of gathering people together in that way in the first place,
right? Kind of like what the word queer is now, because it's queer as a verb, queer as a noun,
yeah, and it's related to sex positivity too, but isn't the same thing either as that. So much. I mean, they definitely have a relationship, those two words, but they're not the same. So the shock was starting to hear from people outside when I would tell them about the center. I'm with the center. Have you heard about the center? Oh yeah, I've heard about it. But that's a lesbian place, right? From gay men. Yeah, I've heard about it, but it's a swinger club, isn't it? From lesbians. You know? Yeah, I've heard about it, but that's queer, right? I'm heterosexual. I don't think I should go there. And every single time I'm like, it's for everyone! And there's something so challenging and so wild to me about the idea that if you hear that a place embraces somebody that you're not, it must mean they don't embrace you. And
that feels very present.
I am so freaked out about that. I mean, if you had to nail down why I think I want this level of interface and pansexual space because too much sexual orientation and all of that, it would be because too many people don't get a chance to be in whatever kind of community is around. I come from the opposite kind of town, right, to LA. I come from Eugene in the 70s, where there was one bar where everybody had to go. Right. The late lamented Riviera Room with big red round booths and a very faded photo of the French Riviera on one wall. Fantastic. Which from Eugene, like what did that even say to people? I mean, cosmopolitan elegance or something, except it was super faded. It was a great bar. I loved it so much. I got snuck in before I was 21 in the middle of a circle of people. They just kind of popped me in the middle of the circle, and everybody on the outside was known quantities, and they just walked me right in.
God, I've done that. Mine was the Inner Belt in Akron, Ohio.
Nice. and smaller and or more conservative towns can have that kind of, oh, you're goth? Well, come on. Yeah. Come on in.
We're
why
all
not?
In this together. We're all the freaks here.
That kind of feeling. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if that helps kind of power this interest in getting out of your silo from time to time. And when I was the director at the gay alliance. We didn't even have LGBT. That's how old I am. When I was the director, the people who came to GPA were not all gay, not all lesbian, not all even bi, not all LGBT. We had that transvestite that wanted us all to march on the department store downtown because they wouldn't let him in the fitting room. We had that person. And we had that couple who we could never figure out what they did. They really appeared to be one man and one woman. They really hung out with us heavily for a while. Was one of them trying to come out and the other one was there to be supportive and really acting as a cock block? I don't know.
Yeah.
Were they like swappers? Were they peggers? What were they? They wanted to be with us, whoever they were. They felt safer with us than wherever else they might have been hanging. And a really big city doesn't give you that. But San Francisco is not a really big city. It's a really important city. It's a very, very important cultural city for lots of things, but certainly for queerness and sex and all that. We're really an identity and community petri dish in so many ways. I mean, the Greater Bay. I'm not downplaying Oakland right now. I'm really not.
But Oakland's got its own flavor. And
it does. Oh yeah, no. Each part of the Greater Bay has certainly got its own flavor and its own mix of kind of these kinds of spaces and identity groupings that we're talking about, right? But in any event, it's a little easier in a place like this to cross the street and see what they're doing over there than it is in a place like LA.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's part of why this entity had to start in San Francisco and not somewhere else, I think. I mean, obviously, we started it, we were there, but that's not all there is to it. It's what the ground already was in terms of a fertile space for a place for everybody. And for all the people who said that kind of shit to me, oh, that's not for me, that's for them. There were plenty of people who didn't have that way of understanding exclusion and exclusion as... I mean, I sort of wonder if those people are more likely to exclude others or if they're just wounded around the idea of being excluded. I mean, who knows? I don't know. I don't have I'm not enough of a psych focused person to know that, but it was really interesting and telling, I thought. And I'm glad that wasn't the end of the story.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I feel like, and this, again, I don't know if this is a psychological aspect or not, but there is this notion of if somebody or like the idea of having to find something sexy being the same thing as having to want to have sex in that way or with that person, right? Like, I think that humans have a really hard time distinguishing between those two things. To see something across the room being sexy, but that doesn't mean that you want to do it or do them. And I feel like until we can really, I feel like some people can't separate those, and the people who can are usually the ones at the dungeon having a great time, not worrying about other people's sex lives because they're satisfied with their own, and they might learn from other people, but they're not feeling this like onus to do the things, as opposed to the people who feel like, oh no, like now this is a conflict in myself, right?
Right, and maybe it's only because they see themselves in monosexual terms and or they're monogamous, and this like, is this gonna haunt their dreams? Is this gonna change their life? I mean, for some people, of course it does, and it does, and maybe it's supposed to, or I don't know, but it's one of the real, I think, bright dividing lines between conservative people and people who aren't very conservative around sex and gender stuff is, don't even show me that idea to ruin my life.
Right. The fear of being exposed to things.
And, we didn't set out to haunt people's dreams. Honestly, we didn't. I mean, not mostly. Some people get into that, I know. But there's something about... beginning to understand. I mean, I'm into menopause, so I'm into a whole new level of this, right? Like, I was talking with another older woman today, and we pulled something out of the archive. It was what was it? The Association is Sex Enthusiasts.
Oh.
It's like from the 1980s
Yeah.
sometime or something. The paper was kind of a little crumbly.
Nice.
And I was like, look, we're sex enthusiasts. And she was like, yeah, if my hormones will cooperate. I'm like,
Right.
we're philosophical sex enthusiasts no matter what else we
Right.
are.
Right.
Like, we know we've made this space. We want to honor that people are continuing to occupy that space, regardless of whether all of our cohort is still occupying it. And there's something about it's sex, I must have it, I can't have it, I must have it that way, I can't have it that way. It's just, oh, everybody I know. I did an interview with somebody from Oakland about 4 years ago, writing for some kind of Oaklandish magazine of some kind. I don't remember the name of it, but we had this little interview and we had a good time and we talked about sex positivity and all the things. And then he turned his recorder off and said, "Can I tell you something?" And of course, that always happens.
Yeah, of course
right?
it
It probably
does.
happens to you too all the
Yep.
time. I mean, we're like the sex positive people are sort of like the priests of sexuality, right? Where people get us buttonholed and want to confess something, so want to process something. And I didn't mean priests in a bad way, everyone.
The good kind of priest.
Yeah,
The priest
no,
that we
no,
like, yeah.
I was just working that confessional parallel, I guess. And he said, "Do you have to be polyamorous if you're sex positive?" And I said, no, you don't. I mean, sure you could if you wanted to. He's like, everybody I know is poly. Everybody. I think I'm monogamous. It's really hard. And I'm all, Bunny,
Yeah.
you don't have to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is how I got to be where I am now in the first place, was being of strong enough character when I was about 9 years old to start saying, you don't have to do what everybody else does. And I understand that ordinarily it's parents who say that.
Right. But the very strong
But I was doing
queen.
it the other way,
Right.
like, yeah, just because you all seem to be straight doesn't mean I have to be straight. Just because, none of you swear as much as I do doesn't mean I can't swear this much. I was practicing swearing. I thought it was like a distinguishing characteristic that I should adopt. And it's funny because if you think there's only one way to be, then if that way doesn't fit, oh, fuck, that's so sad.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's part of the whole problem with sexuality and genders and lack of genders and lack of sexuality. It's part of all of that. It's what keeps sex therapists and relationship therapists in business. It's there's a main way that you're going to be okay and the other ways are not okay. And the center was trying to, by its presence, by its programming, like if you only ever knew about one thing that was going on there, maybe you wouldn't get this message. But if you knew about the programming, it would be like, oh, there's a lot of perspectives here. And we do not do anybody any favors by trying to limit perspectives. And I don't just mean sexual either, but certainly I mean sexual.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing as a person exploring new sexual communities too, is you learn about the individual cultures, the individual etiquette presence in so many places. Again, we have these notions of like, these are the dungeon rules, and if you don't follow these rules, you'll be kicked out, and that those are the rules everywhere. But that's not the case. And I feel like what was beautiful about the center specifically, and I think some sex positive spaces in general, is that like, if you, like, you can feel a little bit like cultural explorer. Like I've definitely been in the vast minority in some spaces or in some parties at the center, where I'm like, oh, this is how this subset of queer fairydom does their parties.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm one of the very few female-identified, female-bodied people here. Like, oh, okay. So now I'm gonna be really cautious and really aware of how much space I'm taking up, and it's just a good education of kind of cultural, like, not, I don't want to say tourism because that has a negative connotation, but cultural exploration of like, okay, like these are people in my community, these are people in my city that I share a city with, but now I'm going to get to know their culture as though I were traveling around the world.
Right. Yeah, I think of this as a sort of anthropology, right? That and it's not just about the sex and gender piece again. I mean, even in any city, any state, then the United States as a whole, any region, anything, there is more diversity of ways that people work it out than mostly we have front of mind when we go there. And it's part of the reason why so much, there's so much onus on saying the wrong thing. And, of course, that's to be worked on, and having the degree of thoughtfulness that you just talked about is, why doesn't everybody try to do that when they cross the street? That would be a good idea.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice? Yeah.
But if we don't know that stuff, it's not just that we step in it sometimes culturally. It's that we really, truly think there's something normative that we're supposed to match up with.
And even if it's in a non-normative community, there's still the normative identity within that community.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting.
So many ways we can make each other feel broken.
But in every single one of the cases of all the communities that we know about, there must have been a time, especially the more recently emerged ones and the more, sort of, I remember when I first heard about furries, I was like, furries?
Tell me everything.
That's a thing? That's great! Yeah. I was driving to Safeway or something in San Francisco one day, and I see a little march on the other side of the street, and it's the furries!
Oh my God.
Marching down the street. I'm like,
fantastic.
How come I didn't know they were going to do that in advance? I'm not on the right mailing list anymore. And that really is a thing now. You got to be on the right mailing list. Wow. You can't keep track of these things. But I love that. I love that somebody made themselves a fursuit and put it on and just felt, I don't know, better, different. Maybe they masturbated, maybe they didn't. And then they were like, who else might have a fursuit? Who else might want a fursuit? I mean, it must have grown like that, right?
Yeah.
Somebody goes to a kinky party and they're the only ones that look like a teddy bear in a room full of like leather straps.
Right.
And they're like, maybe I'll have my own party next time.
Well, I think that we, with the internet being what the internet is, and I feel like we give the internet a little bit too much credit for connecting people to sexuality. Like, I was interviewing Mackenzie Peck, who runs Math Magazine. Are you familiar with Math? Yeah. And she was talking about her own sexual exploration and how she was trying to find porn that she liked on the internet and she wasn't finding it. And so I was like, and she was looking at BDSM, certain things that she just wanted and she couldn't find with Googling. And so I was like, well, how did you figure out what you were into as a teenager who found herself interested in kink and BDSM? She's like, from meeting people in real life and talking about things.
That's
go. How that happened. And so, I think, yes, the internet.
Grasshoppers! This is something to try.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to discredit, the internet has been invaluable in helping people find community that might otherwise be isolated. I think that's very valuable. But sometimes seeing a person, and that's, I think, for me, I'm such a sensualist. It's for me, I need to smell a person to know if I want to fuck them, right? I need to feel their skin under my hands to feel connected to them. So that to me is so important that I could look at porn and be like, meh. But if I'm experiencing that in real life, where it's next to me at a sex party, suddenly it has a different aura to it because now I'm smelling it and I can feel it and I can hear it in a different way that won't be through my laptop, and that might get into my brain in a different way then to see what's truly organically sexy about it.
Queen of Heaven parties were a version of this sort of pansexual and multiple orientation, multiple community space distilled into a play party. So it's not as unusual now to have fucking and BDSM at a play party, but there was a time when that was very not done or not done much. Well, at the Hellfire Club, I suppose, but just not done that much. And gay men and lesbians and swingers and everybody who might want to be a player at a play party did not all go to play parties together. And I was like, why not? Where are my gay men? Where are the people I would want to be in that kind of space with? And it really grew out of the Jack and Jill off parties, where a couple of my colleagues at the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality kind of descended upon a couple of the Jacks. And the San Francisco Jacks and Jacks in other places too. But in San Francisco, I think the Jacks started in 1983, if I remember correctly. And so these two women descended upon the Jacks, and they were like, "Let us come to your party. Let us just hide behind the curtains. We'll hide. We'll hide. You'll never know we're there." And they're like, "Ew, that's scaring us. No, we don't want anyone hiding and staring at us." That, of course, is a different party because somebody does want that. But the Jacks, at least most of the ones that they spoke to, didn't. But they were like, but wait, there's a workaround. Let's just have a party on purpose where we do what we do, but we also invite others and have a Jack and Jill off. Nice. And that was awesome.
Nice. And was that all masturbation? Or
everything, what it wound up being, I mean, the dream was sort of that it was an all masturbation-based party, but that really was what the Masturbate-A-Thon wound up being, to be honest. But the Jack and Jill off was play short of intercourse and what anybody might think of as fucking, right? So it was a no fucking party, and there were a couple reasons for it. One was that it morphed out of the Jacks. Another was that way it could be touted as a safer sex party at a time. This is in the 1980s. The city badly needed some sexy safer sex stuff beyond pamphlets, which were sexier here than other places, but still. And our, safer sex posters also sexier, but still. I mean, it was a time of such terror. It's kind of hard to explain to people who didn't go through any part of it. And it wasn't that there was no play culture, because there was all through the BDSM world and the Jacks and other things, but it really needed to be revived. And this was one of the spaces, and it could be represented as something that would be much safer to go and participate in than whatever kind of garden variety orgy that you otherwise might have been hoping to get an invitation to. And that was what Queen of Heaven riffed out of, very much holding the safer sex piece, even though fucking was fine, but it all had to be condomized, and it was a barrier required party for everybody, and they were like, "We're fluid bonded, not here. You're not."
Yeah.
Because you're lying there with your fluid bonded person, screwing your brains out, and do I, looking at you, believe that you both are as monogamous as you seem to believe you are? Well, I don't know. Right. I'm a realist. Right. I'm not sure about that. That's none of my business on one level, but what is my business is that the people right over there that I invited to this party too, one of whom is HIV positive, are going to be looking at you and going, "Oh, making me feel feels I don't want.
Sure.
And, you know, the fluid bonded people were like, oh, that's not our problem. I'm like, if you're here, it's your problem.
Our house, our rules.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm telling you what I'm talking about, you know, everybody certainly doesn't exclude people with a sexually transmitted condition, because if it did, it would be such a tiny little party.
A sadder one.
All the people who don't know they have their damn herpes. You know, I mean, it's we all deserve space to explore what we want to explore, and sometimes you have to think about what the workaround is for that. But we all deserve that. I mean, that's the link to sex positivity that I think is the most vital to what I was talking about pansexuality. You know, we all deserve to have our sexualities and what we need to explore them safely accessible to us. And sometimes that means how the doctor treats you, and sometimes that means sign right here and promise you'll use condoms at my party.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of different ways that this can happen. And I just felt like if I want to explore the universe that I came to this city to explore, we got to figure out how that happens given the context that we're living in. When I got here, the context was HIV and great fear and this tendency to try to exclude. No. That's not how we get through any kind of crisis like that.
Right. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I feel like, you know, when I talk to other elders about their experiences of sexuality in the 80s, like the Joseph Kramers and the Annie Sprinkles and like these people who were, Barbara Carlos, talking about like exploring different ways of connecting intimately, that just because of how desperate people were to feel affirmed in their sexuality and to feel affirmed with touch, because there was so much confusion and so much fear about how things were transmitted and who's most at risk and what was safe, what wasn't. So it's like but at the same time, like if you're circling the wagons, there's also this need to like still have a campfire in the middle. You still need to have, you know, be taking care of your own in all the different ways that people need love and affection.
And because we sex people often make our communities around sex. And so it's not even just the person-to-person touch and support and affirmation. It's the, can we gather together? I don't want to, by saying that, I don't want to imply to the people who haven't, you know, who don't live within sex community that, oh yeah, we're having sex all the time, that's the only thing. Of course it's not the only thing. But it's in many places outside these communities, despised quality. And we've had quite an uptick of that lately. That needs to find a way to be affirmed in community so that people can live their best lives together in those communities. So it's just necessary to find whatever pathways can be found in those situations. And also when you talk about some of those kinds of people, like I remember hearing Annie Sprinkle talk about her friend and lover Marco Vassi, who, when such an important writer in the sex world and alt world in the 70s and 80s and until he died, and how so many people just withdrew from humanity because their main engaged link with humanity so implicated their sexuality that they didn't know how to go outside in a changed context and get the human contact that they needed. I remember when When I was in San Francisco Sex Information, one of the training staff was a man named Stephen Brown. He died a few years ago. He was actually one of the really super long-lived ones with HIV. He had had HIV since early on, but he remained well most of that time. But he had also been a sex surrogate and a bathhouse habitue and all the things. And Stephen used to say, if you only have one way that you like to get off and you have to change that way because of safer sex or whatever, then you are in bad shape. You really sustain a blow if there's one thing and then you can't do it.
Sure.
If you have about 120 ways to get off, though, it's so much easier.
Yeah, it's so interesting because talking about I had a question yesterday. I was on a panel and somebody had asked about ED medication, why we see that advertised so much and we don't talk about women's sexual pleasure. And I'm like, that speaks to that. It's so many men with so many penis owners are afraid that when their cock stops working, they aren't sexual anymore. They're done. They're punching their ticket for the last time.
Yeah.
As opposed to, hey, BT dubs, you've got 1,200 other ways of enjoying yourself and your spouse or whatever. So try one of those instead. You might find yourself happy.
Yeah, and the fact that this comes creeping up at midlife or later for so many people, it's like, two birds, one stone, people. We were going to suggest to you that you get out of your rut already anyway. Now you're telling me you can't even be in your rut. Well, get out of it.
Find a new rut. Find a couple.
I always wanted to yell at these people. Millions of lesbians can't be wrong. But that's not the right thing to say. Yeah. It's a little. That's too. It's not right. But I would want to yell that.
It's not right, but it's true. Yeah.
I'd always think about it.
Oh yeah, I always talk about that in my sex ed classes where I'm like, let's look at these hands. No matter how, they can be soft, they can be a bit narrow, they can be girthy, they can be scratchy, and no matter how many whiskeys you've had, they're never going soft. So let's just acknowledge how powerful they can be. Yeah.
I suppose if you drink too much whiskey, you can forget about your hangnails, and that's a faux pas.
But yeah. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about, I love that you're talking about history because I do want to talk about the archives a little bit because I find that to be so interesting and the collection that you had amassed over years of sexual what? What kinds of stuff did you keep?
Well, for starters, we were talking about it's not... The internet doesn't get all the credit for bringing sexual people together. Mm-hmm. The communities that I'm talking about were intact, with the possible exception of the furries, before the internet became, for most people, a connecting thing. And so, we're talking all pre-social media for sure. We're talking all the way back to BBSs in some cases and before. So the way we found each other was through flyers and publications and locations, right? And that's still sort of true now, but it's got this whole interweb on top that changes and in some ways complicates the ways that had been developed before. And so we always have collected. I identify now as a socially responsible hoarder. It took me a while really to, sort of own that, but all right, I'm owning it. And that means that I think almost everything is significant. Erotology, a word I learned at the Institute, is the erotic material generated by a culture, either as fantasy and your sort of desire-based material, or documentation from diaries to photos and porns, right? So it's like the literature of sexuality, different media, not all written necessarily, but so erotology and other ephemera that document what was going on in a sexual culture or in a person's own sexuality is the stuff that goes out back and gets thrown in the barrel with the screen on top with the fire in it in the backyard before anything else. And so much of this history has been jettisoned over time. That we'll never fully know our own history as people as far as sexuality and gender identity is concerned, because it probably wasn't being documented as much as we madly do in the 20th and 21st centuries in the first place. But then what did get documented often got trashed.
Yeah, the Nazis burned it first.
And the more personalized, like the more diary-based, the more letters, the more Polaroid pictures, the more personal to your grandma and grandpa or two grandpas or whatever the hell. Like, I thought he was a bachelor. Yeah. The more personal, the more likely it is to be gone. So we kept individual people's materials. Some random person donates us some random stuff that they've accumulated through their life. We would keep it for the most part. The only thing we wouldn't keep in the center was child porn. And we just basically, the way we managed that was we just told people, don't freaking bring us any.
Yeah.
Probably get in trouble if you bring us some. Don't bring it.
Yeah.
He can't hold it.
Right.
Nobody can. I mean,
nobody can hold it. Yeah.
Thank you for preserving your no. So no. But the adult things that people did, we've got everything from porn to academic material. We've got activist-based stuff like flyers from conferences and things like that. We've got cultural things like, we're doing a reading this night at this place. Most of these places don't exist anymore. So, and their cultural history of the Bay Area as well as of these communities, which is sort of this interesting cool crosscut that, up until this most recent infestation of technology into the Inner Bay Area, what did we think of from the outside when we thought of San Francisco? Fruits, nuts, San Francisco values, sex, summer of love. Well, that's a significant part of our history. Sure, there were people doing other stuff. We don't collect that, but and individuals, significant individuals' materials. So we collected Tala Brandeis from SFSI. We collected Patrick Califia's early materials from the period when they were doing Samois, the first women's SM organization around these parts, or practically anywhere. And we've got a little stuff from the artist Charles Gatewood. I was just looking through a box of materials that Bill Brandt, the zine maker, his was Black Sheets and bisexual activist, sent, and just loads of individual people of significance collecting material to fuel their work or to just memorialize where they'd been, what they cared about, and what they read and what they liked, and the stuff that they saved. And sending all this onto another archive is super challenging because so much of what any given person collected means that we had duplicates of a bunch of stuff.
Sure,
so it's more than just one archive that's getting some of this stuff, because we can send the bulk of the material to Harvard for the libraries at Harvard that want it, but we also had a bunch of stuff that's comparable, duplicate stuff. And Cornell's got a wonderful sex archive, so we can share some with Cornell, and we can send some stuff to the one down in Los Angeles. In particular, one important person whose papers and material we had was Larry Townsend. And Larry Townsend is known, to those of us who got into this scene relatively recently as one of the last editors of Drummer magazine, and if you really are seriously a reader and didn't have as many pictures as Drummer, you might know the Leatherman's Handbook and or some of his erotica. But before Larry became a figure in gay men's BDSM and leather culture, and he was very significant from the 70s onward. But before that, he was a homosexual rights activist in LA, and his papers are LA-centric. His work was so much LA-centric, especially that older stuff. So Gail Rubin basically just said, send Larry home to LA. LA is where he should be when people are researching that community's history. Larry's paper should be there.
Nice.
So
nice.
So they're there
That's
now.
Great.
Yeah.
It's so funny. As you're talking about this, it's reminding me of a story I'd like to share of when I started off as a sex educator, I was queer, and so I was aware of my queer history, but I didn't think I was really aware of my sex education history, like the narratives around that, and like the fact that people have been having orgies forever, and the fact that people have figured out ways to fuck each other even when the state decided they shouldn't be fucking. I mean, like, people have been doing this for a long, long time, and that came to me like really clearly when I was teaching in Vancouver at a sex toy store. I was teaching a strap-on workshop. And it was a crowd of, what you might expect walking into a Vancouver sex toy store. So there was an older couple who had recently had been either widowed or divorced, and so they were just starting to see each other. So they're now older, but they're funky, and they're having the Renaissance. Lots of young lesbians, lots of young queers. It was a nice mix, but it was kind of what you'd expect. And then there was this older gentleman, old, probably in his mid 80s. And he kept on, he was quiet, respectful, but he kept on, nodding off in the workshop. And I was new, and it was still kind of uncomfortable. And I'm like, oh, God, this guy right in the middle, he's just sleeping, and this feels weird. And after the workshop, a bunch of people come up to me, and, I talk a little bit, and then he's waiting very patiently to talk to me. And he comes up to me, and he doesn't say a word. He just reaches into this, plastic, supermarket bag, and he pulls out a dildo and with straps. And it's just hollow rubber.
Yep.
And it's got these straps that look like bra straps, really thin elastic, just kind of homemade kind of thing. And he's holding it, and he's like, I just want you to know, this, I used to use this with a beautiful woman that I met when I was a soldier in London. And I would see her, once a month when I was able to get away from the base and go. And I'm like, and he's telling me this amazing story of getting pegged by a British dominatrix. And I'm like, I cannot believe that I had judgments about this man while I was teaching. He was the best person I've ever had come to a workshop, because he was an aficionado long before it was okay for a man like him to walk into any place like that and feel safe walking back out again. It was amazing. And it was that in that moment, I'm like, yeah, old people be fucking. And old people be fucking a lot longer. And it made me so much more humble and so much more, willing to just receive people's stories, to know that, I'm not inventing anything. I'm standing on the shoulders of many invisible giants who may never get to share their story in any way, or may only get to share it in one intimate moment or with one intimate person their entire lives. And I love that the archives have that ability to kind of do that as well.
We will never know when we go about our business, when we go to the bar and have a drink, when we're on public transit, when we go to a conference, when we go to a funeral, or we will never know a fraction of the information about the sex lives of the people around us. And the thing that I see some in a particular kind of sex positive community doing is sort of this thing that if somebody's not flagging it, then they must not, be in the know. And I was like, oh, honey, good for you that you have space to flag it. And hey, I wrote exhibitionism for this shy. I get it. I don't not get it. I get it. But people it's part of the nomenclature wars of the way that we identify and the kinds of language that we can use these days too. It's like I hear that we have some ways that feel best for people now to communicate about these kinds of issues that so many of us still get really, really hurt around in our world.
Yeah.
I am not trying to be a jerk when I say that there are a bunch of people who were doing some shit before you were born. And I remember being a little baby dyke and just kind of really believing that almost all the things had pretty much just been developed by the generation just a tiny bit older than me. Because I knew I was a baby. I knew I was coming into it. But I really wasn't thinking about how those like me were doing it in the 1880s. It didn't cross my mind. But when you start finding out about the history of sex and gender, you start finding out that this has been some people's project for a long time, for decades, for centuries. There has been some difference that people had to make space for, or probably die. Right? And certainly not get laid the way they want, but that seems even like that doesn't even seem important when you say or die, and yet it is important. And
Similar kind of thing.
we just have to remember not everybody flags the same way. Not everybody can be clocked. We don't know who was doing what in 1976. People were doing some shit in 1976. But we can't look at them now and tell. We just can't. And there's this this burden of ageism that we all have to get through in order to truly appreciate the people who came before us, and sometimes even our own damn parents. And I just want to remind people that there have been trails left. And that's why we thought the archive was so important, to help. Like, not everybody went in there and squirreled around. We actually, so many more people will see this material now. So many more, because they're going to archives that have a full staff of archivists. We're an all-volunteer gang, right? It's a freaking miracle that we pulled this off in an expensive city for as long as we did. And we weren't able to share as much as we ideally would have liked with the public, but we did our best. We had cool shows.
Oh, man.
Nina Hartley's fan letters tacked up on the wall. That was such a cool one.
And fan art, like people who are drawing pictures.
Drawing fan art, and you know what? And when there's something about an artist, somebody desiring to commune via art that way, and it doesn't matter if they can draw or not. That is really not the point.
Nope.
I don't want to hear everybody staring at that and going, "That's not a very good picture."
Oh, no.
It's a good picture.
I love that
Nina kept it for years. It's a good picture. And that's the thing that is so delightful now, is that, our herds of citizens running in off the street to comb the libraries of these various archives, maybe a little more than did here, but not that much. But these things are going to show up in books now. They're going to show up on class syllabi now. They're going to inform what people know in the next generation and the next iteration of trying to understand a community and the history associated with sex and gender. And it's going to be safe now. It's going to be safe. And that means, everybody keeps coming up to all of us at CSC and going, aren't you just freaking out, man? And of course we are a little bit, but I want to tell you what, I'm surprised I could sleep at night storing that precious stuff in an 1864 building made out of wood that already halfway burned down after the 1906 quake, which is where we were located and thinking, oh my God, what happens if that building catches on fire?
Yeah.
Now, that's pretty much not going to happen. And I'm so grateful that awesome archivists and librarians and full-on geeks who've been geeking out over all kinds of things in that amazing place. I got a tour. It's amazing.
Yeah.
They've been geeking out, and they said, yeah, we've been collecting anti-porn feminist people for a long time. We finally realized that wasn't appropriate to only collect one side of such an important historical discussion.
Now they've got on our backs.
And I'm all, that's right, and thank you. Been waiting a really long time to hear that piece of culture, the rooted, privileged, holds culture back a long time. Privileges whatever they decide to collect, quite frankly. Waiting a long time to hear them say, what y'all in these communities have been doing has changed the world, has changed people's possibilities, has changed politics, no matter how much they're trying to change it back. It's just changed things. You know, this has been an interesting 50 years. Really, really interesting. Not that the one prior to that wasn't very interesting, because it was. But I'm so glad that materials now go through the door of significant archives, are held there, will inform how we go forward, knowing what people did to make those changes that needed to happen. And hoarders only hold things until they can't hold them anymore anyway, right? And I honestly, sure, I'm a little freaked out. I couldn't be happier knowing that, because this is the secret part of the Center for Sex and Culture. Plenty of people came there and partied, or went to classes, or went to readings, or did the thing. You had to meetings. The community center part and the performance space, etc. Those things are things that everyone in the community who had access to the space could see and feel and experience. But we were running all that so that we could hold this material safe, as safe as we could, and now it's safer.
Yeah. That sounds like a wonderful place to leave it. A very nice moment of hope, and hope for the futures of sex geeks everywhere. Thank you so much for talking to me, Carol.
It is always a pleasure to talk to you, Allison.
Likewise.
Always.
Likewise.
And thank you for asking all these great questions.
Oh, my pleasure.
Helping me go down memory lane a little bit. And rant. I always like to rant at least a little bit in every interview.
Your rants are so good-natured and eloquent, though, so I feel like people don't know that they're being ranted.
That may be, I did rant at y'all a little bit. I don't know. Think back and see if you can notice when I was like,
Yes.
You whippersnappers!
Awesome. Perfect.
It's part of the brilliant change of age that you're like, what was that old fuck yelling, "You kids, get off my lawn"? What were we doing on his lawn? It's worth being able to do that. You all wait. It's great. You'll love it.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. That's great. So good. All right.
And that's it for this week's episode of Artgasm. Thank you, as always, for joining me. If you want to support this podcast, I would so appreciate that. And you can do so by going to patreon.com/artgasm. You can also follow me on Twitter at HeyAllieMoon, on Instagram at Allison_Moon. That's Allison with 2 L's. And of course, you can email me at artgasmcast@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks. Bye-bye.